Early 1943, in the Southwest Pacific. After a terrible collision, an American submarine commander is gravely wounded by enemy fire. He must act to save his crew and their ship.
Gilmore knows that the only way that he's going to get his submarine out of this pickle is to dive immediately. Gilmore also knows any attempt to rescue him is probably going to delay that dive.
He gives a fateful order.
Take her down!
In World War II, a subsea weapon allows warriors to fight from beneath the waves. With cunning, force, and tenacity, their enemies strike back. Revolutionary, but still sometimes primitive, it's a desperate bid to change the course of war. Their stories are legend. July 1942.
Up periscope.
An American submarine commander on his first war patrol attempts to reconnoiter a remote harbor in the North Pacific. Lieutenant Commander Howard Gilmore and the crew of USS Growler patrol off American territory recently seized by the Japanese.
By the summer of 1942, Japan has really reached its zenith. Its empire stretches across 7 time zones and 20 million square miles.
The American islands of Kiska and Attu, part of the Alaskan island chain, now belong to Japan. Though remote, the islands have high symbolic value. The Japanese broadcast the occupation of U.S. soil and suggest that an offensive on the American mainland might be next.
Up periscope.
Now, Gilmore and his crew prepare to harass Japanese ships around the islands, and the search for targets proves a challenge. The area is notorious for fog. Gilmore's visibility is often as little as 500 yards. But early on July 5th, after 5 days of catching sight of nothing but fog, morning light reveals 3 Japanese ships in Kiska Harbor.
Battle stations, torpedoes.
The new commander and his crew ready an attack.
For the first time, it's real. This isn't a drill, this isn't a training exercise. This is everything these men have prepared for.
Captain!
There's just one problem. U.S. Navy intelligence believes that explosive mines may protect the harbor. Growler has instructions to hunt well offshore, outside the 100-fathom line, where the water is deeper than 600 feet. From that range, Gilmore cannot set up a shot, although his first-hand knowledge of Kiska's fog may prove helpful.
He's pretty convinced that the visibility is so bad, no one would lay a minefield because they'd never know exactly where it was.
Gilmore decides to take the chance and advance into the harbor to make his first attack.
He keeps pushing in there, really against orders.
Gilmore has shown this kind of determination before. He is an officer who had joined the U.S. Navy as an enlisted man.
Howard Gilmore was not part of the Navy's aristocracy. He did not come in on the coattails of his father or his grandfather.
After the Navy opened its academy to enlisted sailors, Gilmore earned entry by competitive exam in 1922. He trained as an officer and assumed command of submarines. Now, As Growler creeps into Kiska Harbor, Gilmore's gamble pays off. No mines detonate.
Up periscope.
Growler's commander strains to confirm the identity of his 3 targets. As Gilmore closes in, he identifies the ships as destroyers. 2 of the 3 destroyers are Japan's new Asashio class.
The Japanese look at destroyers as being attack platforms. So they are big, they are fast, they are powerfully armed.
They have 6 deck guns and carry 16 depth charges. 8 tubes stand ready to launch torpedoes from the decks. Gilmore must choose: retreat to safety or attack.
Tangling with a destroyer is a big fight. Tangling with 3 destroyers is borderline crazy.
Despite the risk, Gilmore decides to strike.
Ready, forward tube. Whoa!
With Growler's torpedo tubes ready, the crew prepares to fire.
Solution, Captain.
Fire.
At 0555, Growler launches 2 torpedoes. Both find their marks. 2 of the destroyers are hit. Gilmore shifts focus to the 3rd warship. Growler fires off 2 more torpedoes. But their target retaliates. The destroyer quickly replies with 2 torpedoes from its deck tubes.
Take us 100 feet.
In response, Gilmore orders his submarine deeper to avoid the counterattack. One of Growler's torpedoes misses the 3rd destroyer, but the other strikes true. As the submarine descends to 100 feet, the crew hears the 2 enemy torpedoes sweep past. They have evaded the twin threats. When Gilmore judges it safe, Growler creeps back to periscope depth,
Up periscope.
and he surveys the damage. Growler's first attack sinks 1 destroyer and cripples 2 others.
This is absolutely superlative shooting on Gilmore's part. This is essentially a walk-on rookie hitting a grand slam home run.
But 2 days later, as Lieutenant Commander Gilmore seeks to build on his success, Kiska Island's inescapable fog frustrates his periscope search. To have any chance of locating Japanese ships, Gilmore has only one option.
Down periscope.
He brings Growler to the surface to scan the seas from the submarine's bridge.
Your visibility is going to be much better on the surface than under the surface. You're another 20 feet above the water. Your horizon is that much further away.
But there is a dangerous trade-off. Topside, the submarine itself can also be spotted.
Target! Port bow!
All of a sudden, a Japanese destroyer emerges from the fog. But unlike the stationary targets Growler ambushed in Kiska Harbor, this destroyer closes in to attack.
Clear the bridge. Dive!
July 1942.
Fire!
After a daring attack in Kiska Harbor in the North Pacific,
Target! Port bow!
a Japanese destroyer appears out of the fog
Clear the bridge! Dive!
and prepares to attack American submarine USS Growler.
By surfacing, he's exposed himself. Now he's put himself and his whole crew at risk. He's messed up, and he knows it.
After a quick dive and below periscope depth, Lieutenant Commander Howard Gilmore briefly debates firing a torpedo, but he lacks enough information to set up the shot. Within minutes, the enemy ship drops underwater explosives called depth charges.
You can think of a depth charge basically as a 55-gallon drum with about 300 pounds of explosive in it.
That detonates when they reach a preset depth.
Left full rudder!
As they explode, Gilmore begins evasive maneuvering. But the destroyer persists. A pattern of 10 more depth charges rocks Growler.
It doesn't have to hit you directly. But even 100 feet away can still damage the submarine.
Growler continues to absorb the force of the explosions. As the blasts fade, the crew surveys the aftermath.
It's clear that there's been superficial damage, broken light bulbs and that sort of thing, but much more worrying, there's structural damage that's happened at the rear of the submarine.
At the stern, there are problems with the dive planes and the propellers.
My screws are making a clicking noise now. That's not good. My diving planes aren't working very smoothly, and that's not good either.
Growler is now harder to control and easier for enemy sonar to detect. Before long, Growler's crew begins to hear the dreaded pings. Proof the enemy continues the hunt for their sub. The Japanese destroyer employs active sonar, which emits pulses of sound into the water. If the sound waves deflect off the submarine, its location could be detected. The Japanese also search with passive sonar, which means they use hydrophones to listen for any trace of the submarine. "250 feet beneath the surface, Gilmore operates his submarine with as much stealth as possible. He suspends all non-essential operations to reduce noise.
During silent running, all unnecessary crew are ordered to get in their bunks. The air conditioning systems are shut down. I mean, if a crewman drops a wrench or even a coffee mug, it's possible for the enemy to hear it.
Unable to defend themselves with weapons, Gilmore must get away. He devises a shrewd plan.
Right full rudder! All ahead full!
Gilmore is pulling every trick out of his bag of tricks that he can. He'll create what's known as a knuckle in the water.
By shifting his rudders back and forth, he will produce turbulent pockets of water filled with bubbles. These pockets, or knuckles, can deflect sonar pings.
Shift your rudder. I'll stop.
It is a misdirection tactic. The goal is to make the Japanese believe the knuckles are in fact the submarine, leading them to attack empty ocean as Growler tries to sneak away.
Left full rudder.
But instead, the pings grow louder, and the enemy's propellers speed up. With the destroyer closing in, the crew brace for another attack. As a trapped and damaged submarine, Growler's first war patrol could also be its last. July 1942. After a severe depth charging off the island of Kiska, an American submarine commander attempts to shake a Japanese destroyer, which hunts his wounded submarine.
Right full rudder, all ahead full.
You're in the middle of a battle, so it's really a terrifying time to be on board as you're trying to sneak away from the enemy.
But the enemy ship proves determined.
Shift your rudder. All stop.
As Lieutenant Commander Howard Gilmore attempts to evade the destroyer's sonar, 3 more depth charges descend on USS Growler. They estimate the nearest explosion is only 50 yards away. At last, 4 hours after the attack on Growler began, the sound of the destroyer's propellers fades away. Growler surfaces. The seas are clear. But damage suffered during the depth charge attacks puts an end to their first patrol. And they set course for safe port. After attacking 3 destroyers in an enemy harbor, Gilmore earns the Navy Cross for the patrol.
At this point in the war, American submarine commanders are not as aggressive as they should be. So for a rookie commander like Gilmore to go in and have this successful a cruise, that's a real standout.
But in addition to rewarding Gilmore, the Navy uses patrol reports from commanders like him to teach other officers what it means to be great.
All of these reports are read very carefully by the submarine command force. This is how we are learning and evolving.
American submariners apply this knowledge as they continue to fight the war in the Pacific. 5 months later, USS Growler begins to hunt Japanese targets near Rabaul.
Rabaul is the linchpin of Japan's efforts in the South Pacific. It's the main supply point. It's a major naval base and air base as well.
U.S. naval intelligence believes that a buildup of forces here will be used to reinforce the island of Guadalcanal, where the Allies have successfully landed troops. Now on their 4th war patrol together,
The crew at this point is going to be much more relaxed. The boat has been tested, they have been tested, so they're far more seasoned.
Periscope.
but 15 days into their patrol, when Gilmore orders a depth change, Diving Officer Lieutenant Landon Davis brings Growler up 6 feet higher than Gilmore intends.
You do not want the top of your conning tower suddenly coming out of the water, because that advertises your presence to anybody in the neighborhood.
One of the greatest threats are enemy aircraft, which cause about 20% of U.S. submarine losses in World War II. And Davis's mistake demonstrates how. A half-mile away, a Japanese warplane is on patrol and closes in. Gilmore orders his submarine deep. But the plane still launches its attack and drops 2 bombs. The crew hears the explosions in the distance. Growler manages to evade, this time. But Davis's mistake put everyone's lives at risk, and Gilmore's position requires that he holds everyone to the highest standards.
This cannot happen again.
Yes, sir.
All the accounts we have of him show him being very fair, but also not unwilling to tell people when they've messed up.
Get out.
Sir.
Nearly 3 weeks later, Growler's hydrophone operator picks up the distant sound of propellers, and radar shows a cluster of ships nearly 5 miles away. Growler sets off in pursuit of a convoy. Gilmore calculates the speed and direction of the Japanese ships and attempts a tactic known as an end-around. Running on the surface at high speed, his goal is to position Growler in front of the convoy's path. When Gilmore locates the ships, they turn in to face their targets, to minimize the submarine's profile and sneak in to attack. But as the submarine prepares to strike, a Japanese patrol boat protecting the convoy opens fire.
Clear the bridge!
Gilmore orders a dive and decides on a submerged approach instead. Within minutes, depth charges pursue the submarine.
Take us to 150 feet.
Gilmore orders Growler deeper, but the explosions continue. Suddenly, water begins to pour into the submarine. The team rushes to the forward torpedo room to staunch the flow. February 1943. After being depth charged by a Japanese patrol boat, water surges into USS Growler's forward torpedo room. They discover that the source of the flood is the #1 main ballast tank. When they surface, the crew forces water from the ballast tanks with pressurized air. This makes the submarine lighter and increases its buoyancy. When they dove to evade the patrol boats, they replaced the air in the ballast tanks with water to make the sub heavier so it sank into the ocean. Somehow, the depth charge attack damaged the gasket which seals the manhole into this ballast tank.
We got a problem, Skipper.
Now you're getting an upwelling of water that's coming into the pressure hull. This is a bad thing.
As the minutes pass, the leak grows worse.
They've got about 1,000 gallons an hour of water coming into the pressure hull. That's not exactly a minor sort of thing.
Growler's crew do what they can to contain the water, but the gasket must be fixed. However, the subsea pressures on the submarine and the tanks make it impossible. To make this repair, the submarine needs to be on the surface. But Lieutenant Commander Howard Gilmore knows surfacing Growler would expose them to the Japanese escorts. so they track the enemy ships above. Hours later, when the coast is clear, Gilmore finally risks surfacing under cloak of darkness. With pressure in the leaky ballast tank reduced, the crew quickly repair the breach. Later versions of the American submarines would eliminate this opening to prevent future mishaps. Two days later, Gilmore and his crew seek to improve their fortunes. But the seas are dark and stormy. Even on the surface, where visibility is best, Gilmore and his lookouts strain to see.
Target! Port bow!
Just after 0100 hours, lookouts detect a barely discernible shape against the rough seas.
Range.
2,000 yards!
All ahead full.
Crew take their battle stations and ready the submarine's torpedo tubes. Gilmore believes it may be a Japanese ship Growler has encountered before.
They had sighted a gunboat a couple of days ago, and they think they're going to get a second crack at it.
Gilmore is wrong. The vessel is Imperial Japanese Navy supply ship Hayasaki. As Growler circles to attack, Hayasaki also changes course and turns toward the submarine. It seems the Japanese have also spotted Growler and prepare for some sort of attack. In Growler's conning tower, Gilmore's executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Arnold Shade, prepares to fire torpedoes. But the radar man detects the change. He warns that the Japanese ship now heads directly toward them.
We're now on a collision course with this thing. The engagement window is now much tighter. Things are going to happen much faster.
Shade must now recalculate the firing solution of Hayasaki on its new course. The submarine has little time to take the shot.
So a torpedo needs about 500 yards to arm itself. And at that close range, you're really opening up a risk for the submarine.
If their attack does not succeed, Shade has now updated his solution to target Hayasaki.
Solution, Captain.
But to launch a torpedo, Lieutenant Commander Gilmore must give the order from the bridge. But something is wrong. Socked in by poor visibility, Gilmore and his lookouts cannot see that Hayasaki has turned. And they hear no warnings from the crew below deck.
There's clearly a communications breakdown of some sort here. Somehow the information is just not getting up to the bridge as quickly as it ought to be.
We're too close. Slow down.
February 1943. American submarine USS Growler is on a collision course with a Japanese ship, but Lieutenant Commander Howard Gilmore does not know it. The supply ship has few weapons, but traveling at a high speed towards Growler, it appears intent on ramming the submarine.
As a submarine, if you suffer any sort of damage to your pressure hull, you can't dive. And if you can't dive, you're essentially defenseless.
In the darkness and rain, Gilmore is slow to recognize the threat.
We're too close. Slow down.
Gilmore is now in a position where he's lost 30 or 40 seconds of reaction time, and he's going to pay the price for that.
When the Japanese ship comes into view, Gilmore finally realizes the danger they are in. Growler has lost the opportunity to fire their torpedoes. The enemy is now too close. Not able to mount an attack, Gilmore's only hope is to somehow avoid a fatal collision.
This is about the last thing in the world any submarine commander would want.
Left full rudder.
He orders a course change. But it is too late.
It's a violent collision. People are being thrown off their feet. And there's going to be this horrendous shriek of metal as the two hulls are grinding past each other.
USS Growler rolls over nearly 50 degrees before righting itself again. As Gilmore and his crew pick themselves up, the Japanese, at the ready, take aim.
Hayasaki opens up on the Growler with every machine gun that it's got available, just strafing the deck.
In the hail of bullets, 2 crew members are quickly killed.
If you're a crewman on that exposed submarine bridge, it's a very violent, bloody situation. You're basically looking up as these machine guns are hitting you.
As the surviving bridge crew struggle for their lives, below deck, Lieutenant Commander Arnold Shade pulls himself together after Growler's collision with Hayasaki knocked him down a hatch to the deck below. As Gilmore's second in command, Shade moves in to assist crewmen who hustle off the bridge.
Let's go, boys, come on! Come on, let's go!
One by one, the wounded descend into the submarine. But Gilmore will not follow until every one of his men is safe. And is himself struck.
If you read the action report, the picture you get is the crew basically looking up at this hatch and waiting for Gilmore to show up, and he never does.
Wounded by enemy fire, Growler's commander is unable to get below.
Gilmore knows that the only way that he's going to get his submarine out of this pickle is to dive immediately. Gilmore also knows, though, that any attempt to rescue him is probably going to delay that dive.
He gives a command that would become famous.
Take her down!
With a direct order to take her down, Shade faces an impossible choice.
He either saves his ship or he saves his skipper. It's really unthinkable. It's the kind of decision that will haunt you for life.
February 1943. After a spectacular collision with a Japanese ship, Lieutenant Commander Howard Gilmore lies seriously wounded on the bridge of an American submarine.
Take her down!
His executive officer, Arnold Shade, must decide: save Gilmore or dive to save the submarine. For 30 seconds, Lieutenant Commander Shade hesitates.
30 seconds is an eternity in the middle of a fight like this. You want to get this submarine submerged absolutely as rapidly as possible.
Shade finally makes the call.
Sound the diving alarm. Flood negative.
Growler dives to escape the Japanese ship. But as it descends, another battle for survival begins.
All compartments report damage.
Torn up by the battle with Hayasaki, the submarine begins to flood.
I'm working on it.
Water pours through a bullet hole in the hatch and cable sheathing into the conning tower, the navigation and attack center of the submarine. One by one, critical systems shut down as the water causes wiring to short out.
Growler is a mess. We've been battle damaged, we've got casualties. It is a life or death situation at this point in time.
Because of the structural impact of the collision and the uncontrolled flooding, Diving Officer Lieutenant Landon Davis fights to stabilize their descent.
She doesn't maneuver very well at all. You have to wonder whether or not this sub that I'm diving now is ever going to come back up.
Crewmen rally to plug the leaks. But the submarine is now 150 feet below the surface. Pressure from the ocean forces more water in. The Japanese drop 2 depth charges from above. The explosions are distant. But for Arnold Shade, who has assumed command of USS Growler, they are a reminder of the lurking danger. By 0145, repairs have Growler's sonar operational. The crew listens for signs of the Japanese ship they collided with. They hear nothing. And every minute Growler remains submerged, more water leaks in. So half an hour after the collision with Hayasaki,
Battle surface.
Shade decides to surface the submarine.
He does order a battle surface, so he's going up looking for a fight. He may think that the Hayasaki is still in the neighborhood. He also may, of course, be interested in seeing if he can recover the skipper.
But when Shade ascends to the bridge, there is no sign of Lieutenant Commander Gilmore or Hayasaki. He speculates the Japanese ship Growler collided with has sunk. For the first time, Shade can see the damage to the front of his submarine.
The bow has been bent 90 degrees to the port side. Growler's crumpled like a Spam can.
With dawn only a few hours away, the crew race to complete makeshift repairs and plug the bullet hole in the conning tower.
Clear the bridge!
Before first light, to avoid detection in enemy waters, Shade orders Growler down. The change to its hydrodynamic shape makes depth difficult to gauge and control. The crew observes how the submarine behaves and adjusts as they go.
Make your depth to 150 feet.
If they run too shallow, they may be spotted. Go too deep, and their crippled boat could sink. That evening, they surface again under cover of darkness and request an emergency routing to return to base.
You've lost your commanding officer. The submarine is beaten to pieces. This is going to be a very long, somber transit.
They plan to travel submerged during the day through enemy waters, then race as quickly as possible on the surface each night to cover the 2,000-mile journey home. But resistance created by Growler's blunted bow slows their speed. What's more, the water forced across the bent bow pushes the submarine continuously to the left and requires the helmsman to shift the rudder to the right to correct the drift, and further slows their progress. Altogether, the damage reduces their overall speed by 30%. 10 days later, USS Growler finally limps into base at Brisbane, Australia, where Captain James Fife is in command.
Captain Fife commends Shade for his leadership under very trying circumstances, calls it one of the outstanding feats of the war, and also vows that Growler will return to the fight again.
From the deformed bow to the bullet holes which perforate the bridge and conning tower, the damage to Growler is extensive, but it could have been worse.
The Japanese had focused almost all their fire exclusively on the conning tower instead of targeting the pressure hull, which would have made it impossible for them to be able to dive again.
Meaning the submarine would have likely been sunk or captured. Now safe, inspection gets underway in Brisbane. With the damaged section removed, they discover all the forward torpedo tubes are intact. Crews replace the bow's frame and plating at Moreton Dry Dock. The Australian workers weld a kangaroo to each side of the new bow and call the restored submarine the Kangaroo Express. By May 1st, 1943, USS Growler sails again. For his role in managing to dive and then surface the damaged Growler, diving officer Lieutenant Landon Davis earns a Silver Star.
In the heat of the moment, under horrendous circumstances, Davis really comes through.
Lieutenant Commander Arnold Shade earns a Navy Cross for his actions and leadership to bring the submarine home to port. Now Growler's skipper, at age 31, Shade is the youngest U.S. submarine commander in the Second World War. But the highest honor is awarded to Growler's fallen commander, Howard Gilmore. In the summer of 1943, Gilmore becomes the first submariner to earn the Congressional Medal of Honor. His wife and children accept the medal on his behalf.
His citation for the Medal of Honor says that he gives the order to dive the submarine knowing full well he is not going to survive. That is the kind of role model that you do want to emulate in the military, someone who is willing to give his all in protection of his men.
The phrase, "take her down," would be forever tied to the submarine service and this legendary commander.